Hey, Richard Myers here. Hey, thank you for joining me. This is hopefully going to be a exciting video for everyone today. I want to refer in this video to Matthew 24. Now, in Matthew 24, Jesus is sitting on the Mount of Olives, looking across at the temple. The disciples come to him and they have a question. Now, the church is not involved in this discourse. Their question sets the context for Jesus' response. And he responds telling them what is going to be the end of the age and the signs of the end of the age. But in here, he says, and I'll give you the page number. Now, I'm working from the Jesus Christ, the Greatest Life. And I encourage all of you to get this book. And I'm in this very first part. I'm in page 209. And so Jesus on the Mount of Olives, and Peter, James, John, and Andrew come to him privately and ask, "Teacher, please tell us, when will these things happen?" And so they're steeped in Daniel's prophecy, and they're steeped in the Old Testament, and the Old Testament declares in Daniel 9, chapter 9, that Jesus is 70 weeks have been decreed to bring everything to conclusion. And once we kind of unlocked that 70-week prophecy, Sir Robert Anderson and the Coming Prince, I think, was one of the very first books to kind of unlock that prophecy. I came to Christ, by the way, in a prophetic ministry, a teaching of that day. I came forward, and that's how I accepted Christ. And when will these things come to be? And then I move over to page 213 in here, and now we're at Matthew. Matthew 24 at verse 32 and 42, and that in the lower part of Matthew 24, of course, Luke 21 and Mark 13. And here we have this statement, and this has confounded us for all of my lifetime. He gives a bunch of things, all of these things will take place. And then he says, "I tell you the truth, this generation," that is to say, the generation that sees all of these things, "will by no means pass away before all of these things have been fulfilled." And so the question is, what's a generation? We've been working with this my whole life. And of course, Israel became a nation in 1948, so we kind of assumed that was the beginning point, and they tried to measure a generation from there. So this has been on the top of everybody's mind to try and figure out, when will the end of the age take place? This generation shall not pass away. Well, what I failed to miss was this word all these things taking place. And what is implied here is a global understanding of these things that are unfolding. And in other words, a ship hit the bridge there in Baltimore yesterday. We all had immediate knowledge of that. In October 7th, when the Holocaust happened as Gaza, as Hamas invaded Israel, we saw it the next day. We had pictures of it, and we saw it on our phones. So global, the ability to see things globally. Now in the 1800s, you couldn't see things globally. You got the news weeks, months, maybe after an event took place. It's only been the era of the World Wide Web, the internet. And so I was introduced to a fellow, and I want to commend him to you. His name is John Barnett, and his ministry is DTBM. And I'll let you figure out what that stands for. I think it's kind of crazy title, but DTBM. And John Barnett is a guy that he's a teacher, and he taught at Master's College and was on staff with John MacArthur. So that gives you an idea of his theological perspective. He's a graduate of Bob Jones University and had a Doctor of Ministries from Dallas Theological Seminary. So the guy is well equipped in terms of exegetical skills, is a good teacher. Now, I wouldn't recommend him. He doesn't have a scientific background, and he doesn't have scientific training. And so in the creation narratives and some of those, of course, I wouldn't hold him out. I wouldn't commend him as a source for teaching. But he brought out something that I had missed, and that's that the ability globally for everyone on the planet to see these prophetic timetables that Jesus is telling. When you see these things happening, all of these things. So when it's the generation then that sees all of these things taking place, not just one or two, not just tribulation, not just rumors of war, Second World War kind of thing, First World War, but when you see them all together, then that generation, the generation that sees them all together, will not pass away. Now, I just go back in my own historical information that I lived. And so it wasn't until really mid-2000s that this was a reality. And let me explain. When the World Wide Web and the Internet came into being and was generally available to the public, I was a business consultant at the time, and I would consult with my clients. And I'd look, if you're going to buy a computer and use the internet, you need to budget $10,000. And some would scoff at me, so I could buy a computer for $2,500. And I'd say, well, that's true, but there's software, and then you have to hire an IT person, and then the thing won't work. And you don't realize back in those days you had to buy a new computer every 18 months, sometimes sooner, because the capacity of the computers was increasing so fast. They would develop new software and it wouldn't work on the older computers. So it was difficult days. Things didn't work. And Bill Gates came out with a book, and he said that things aren't going to work really well for 20 years. It's going to take 20 years for this to become stabilized enough to where your business could be run reliably off of this. And people scoffed at Bill Gates. I remember that. And of course, the stock market crashed. And in the end, 20 years later, Bill Gates, yeah, I was right. Now a computer lasts 10 or 12 years. My last computer was 12 years old. My IT guy says that this computer that I'm using now will last at least 10 years. This was unheard of in the 1980s and early 90s. I mean, computers, like I say. So things were there. The internet was there, but it really didn't work in a way that you could incorporate it into your daily lives, in a way that everybody in the world could use it. It wasn't really until the mid-2000s. And now you could access the internet. You could buy a computer. Now you can buy a beautiful, powerful computer for less than $1,000. It's unbelievable. And of course, you've got your phone. And so you can access the World Wide Web and the internet on your phone. And like I say, we now have access, but that only began at about 2005. And so if John Barnett, and I'm going to give you a link to his video, he's saying that what Jesus is saying here, when all can see global manifestation of what he's projecting here, that generation will not pass away. Now I realize that's not me. This is the hard part for me. It's my kids. In other words, it's the thing worked kind of toward the end of my working career. It was kind of at the end of the computer, when the computers really began to work well and the systems were stabilizing, your software didn't crash and all of these things. And then the smartphone, I was getting ready to retire. And so I realized that my children, my wife and I lost a baby when we were first married. That baby would be 61 years old, 62 years old. And I realized that my nieces and nephews and my own children in their 50s and 60s. And it's that generation that I believe fits perfectly here based on this new exegetical data. That generation will not pass away. And so we've now kind of narrowed it down from 100 years down to maybe 20 years, when Jesus is going to bring all things to a conclusion. And so it's the generation of my children that it's if you're in your if you were born, say, in 1960 or forward. Now, John Barnett, I couldn't find his age because of his lack of hair. He may look older than he is, but I think I could be his parent. I think he's probably around 60 years old, or maybe even in his late 50s. He might look older than that, but I think that's the case. So it's his generation, not mine, but his generation, where it says that generation shall not pass away. And what he's predicating this upon is the fact that global knowledge of all, that's the key that I missed here in Matthew 24. Now, if you want to talk about the church, then that's the upper room discourse when Jesus had his disciples and he was talking about building his church. He said, I go to prepare a place and come back and receive you unto myself. A totally different conversation, totally different context of questions. And so here, though, the disciples represent Israel and they're asking a question that is really based on the Old Testament. And so I think now we have exegetical evidence that suggests that this generation is the generation that was born in 1960 and forward, and it will not pass away before all these things are wrapped up. Now, I'm going to refer you to John Barnett, and I'm going to give you a link to his, you can look up his name on a YouTube search, or you can go to, I think it's DTBM, and he has a teaching ministry. By the way, he's moved to the internet, which fits in with something I did in an earlier video. And now the internet is so powerful, and you can reach so many people. But it's in that video, and I have to say, his exegesis of this passage, Matthew 24, was compelling. And so I would commend it to you. Now, I wouldn't commend him for everything. I don't want to give a blanket recommendation to his teaching because I haven't listened to many of his videos. But I would commend this video to you. And think about it, the generation that you're in, if you're 60 years old or younger, is the generation here that will not pass away. Hey, fascinating stuff. Love you guys. Always interesting to think about these things and to look forward to the Lord's coming and wrapping all of the problems of civilization, pulling it to a conclusion, and we'll be with him for eternity. Hey, thank you for your attention.